And it is easier for heaven and earth to pass than one tittle of the law to fail. Whosoever putteth away his wife and marrieth another committeth adultery. Now, very true, and of course, quite literal. Jesus, when he said this, meant exactly that. He didn't mean anything else. He meant precisely that. However, what was the context it was said in? This is very important. Who he said it to, what they understood, what the background was. Now, Jesus said it. He said it at a time in the development, if you like, or a time when the biblical law was followed. Well, very often, we'll go into it later on how people would get around it, but this law, which would not one tittle would fail, it was easier for heaven and earth to pass away. It was that solid. Tells us that if a man and woman were married and the man committed adultery or the woman committed adultery, the guilty party would be stoned to death. So that's not a question of putting away. In the case of adultery, it's if your wife committed adultery in those days, you wouldn't have to put her away. That scripture wasn't written to you. You could have her stoned and then you could remarry. I think it's very important that we look at the context that it was said in. That scripture about putting away one's wife and marrying another was certainly not for the case of adultery. However, I think some of you will be thinking, what about, let him amongst you have no sin, cast the first stone. Jesus pardoned the woman caught in adultery. He didn't have her stoned. Again, we have to look at the context of what was going on there. The scribes and the Pharisees, they caught her, or they had her, and they were going to stone her to death. There's no mention of the man being there, the other guilty party. It takes two to commit adultery. Very difficult to do on your own, in fact impossible. So, I think we can assume the law wasn't being fulfilled there. It wasn't being practiced as intended. Jesus therefore pardons the woman. This law, don't forget, not one tittle of it will fail. Heaven and earth, it's easier for them to pass first. So on these two examples, I think we can say that if a man or a woman commit adultery within a marriage, then the innocent party can remarry.